Good afternoon, everyone. This is Greg Mansup with SecureAuth. I am the Vice President of Sales for the East Region, and we're going to get started on our webinar here for today. The topic for today's webinar is around the New York State cybersecurity legislation and how SecureAuth is actually helping companies not only be in compliance and be more secure with regards to the legislation that's gone into effect. So today's agenda for the 30-minute webinar is we'll go through introductions, we'll discuss the current legislation that's currently in place, what is actually involved with it, who is affected by it, when you must actually be in compliance with it, and how SecureAuth can help you actually meet some of these requirements. And then we'll finish up with a question and answer session at the end of the webinar today. A few housekeeping items to go over for everyone. By default, everyone's lines are actually on mute, but you may actually submit questions anytime during the webinar through the actual panel, and we will actually review and answer all the Q&A at the end of the webinar today. All the slides in this actual recording will be sent to you a little bit later this week. And one of the points of contact that you can reach out to SecureAuth at is actually webinars@secureauth.com. Our guest speaker today is actually Danielle Jackson. Danny is actually our Chief Information Security Officer here at SecureAuth. She has over 15 years of leadership experience with helping actually companies implement a vendor security risk and assessment program. She's worked at Fortune 500 companies, as well as served as the Director of Information Security at Bloomberg and Mandiant. Beyond being a colleague, Danny is actually a recognized expert around helping companies around governance, risk, and compliance, and is a regular speaker at industry events throughout the world. So I'd like to start out the call, hand it off to Danny, and then she'll hand it back over to myself. Danny?
Discuss the new legislation, what we could do to help you meet some of these requirements, and what it all means. March of this year, New York passed a requirement that was in effect starting March. You will need to be compliant by September of this year, and starting next year in 2018, you will have to annually attest and provide a certificate of completion and readiness assessment every year thereafter that you have met these controls. So what are these controls and what are these requirements? This slide highlights just a few of the different sections within NYCRR 500 cybersecurity framework that's applicable to all of the financial service companies. As you'll see, the items in red that are highlighted are ones that are specific around access management, identity and access management, access controls. And then you'll see a few others out there, such as network monitoring, data privacy, audit, privileges, and different types of policies, in addition to multi-factor authentication. So those items in red are really critical to what we could do at SecureAuth to help you achieve and meet these. We are not an all-in-one package. We're not going to help you solve all of the requirements identified in this new legislation, but what we can do is we can help you identify what areas in access, identity and access management and in security that are critical to these different areas in the requirements to help you meet these. So Greg, can we go to the next slide? I'd like to talk a little bit more about what the regulation does to combat the increase of these attacks, who it affects, and then I'd actually like to turn it over to you to maybe start discussing a little bit more about the breaches and why this legislation is important. So individuals and organizations in insurance, banking, and financial services are those that are going to have to be compliant with the new regulation. As I had mentioned earlier, it takes effect this March, so we've already passed the time that it was implemented, and you have 180 days from March to comply. So by September 1st of this year, all organizations will need to comply with the requirements outlined. Those are all of those black bulleted items by September 1st of this year. So the majority of the organizations that are impacted are going to leverage their cybersecurity programs their security organizations, or their compliance programs. This is going to help develop the policies and procedures that you'll need to protect non-public data. SecureAuth has a variety of adaptive authentication solutions to help you achieve not only multi-factor authentication, but the protection and the detection of all of these different areas that are going to be highlighted throughout the requirements as well. So Greg, can we go to the next slide? I'd like to show a little bit of some numbers and the impacts of why this requirement was actually in the works for, I believe it was the last 6 years, and some of the numbers over the last year or two helping push this regulation through. So there were over 1,300 breaches reported in 2016, and those were independent breaches, just in New York. 60% of those, or I'm sorry, that was a 60% increase over the last year, the previous year in 2015. Over 1.6 million New York residences had personal records exposed with these breaches. Primarily, there were social security numbers and financial account information, but during all of this, New York decided to take a poll and to see how many organizations had strong security mechanisms in place, and the number was pretty shocking. So as you see at the table on the right, the number of New York residents affected was, again, almost at 1.6 million, and it's broken down each month by the amount of breaches that were reported by these organizations that are just in New York. So Greg, can we go to the next slide? I'm going to transition this off to Greg. I'd like to have him discuss just a little bit of the numbers again of how 81% of all breaches involve stolen credentials, why multi-factor authentication was actually created as one of the highlighted areas within this new regulation to help organizations implement and stop these breaches. So Greg, I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you, Danny. So as Danny mentioned, with 81% of the breaches in the latest Verizon breach report involving stolen credentials, what we've seen and how SecureAuth has actually helped our financial services companies is there has been a significant investment in network and endpoint security. These investments have not slowed down breaches. We all know that in the market today, the attackers are, and the type of attacks that are taking place are becoming more sophisticated, and they are creating serious challenges for organizations. I have yet to meet a customer that tells me they're able to keep up with all of the types of nefarious activity that's taken place in their environments. When we look at the types of cybersecurity events that are happening and why this legislation was put into place, what we've seen is malware and organized crime and organized attacks being able to grow in level of being advanced that is actually impacting customers. I think everyone's quite aware of the type of breaches and what happens based on initial penetration, establishing a foothold, and then the goal of that nefarious bad actor is to stay transparent and hidden from being detected and be able to move laterally. One of the benefits, and as Danny had mentioned in the beginning slides, is there's a lot of areas that you are going to need to be able to be in compliance as an organization. SecureAuth has actually taken the burden of building that integration to those different investments that you've already made, whether it's at the network or at the endpoint or with privileged access management systems or governance systems. We've actually taken that burden off of the plate for you and done that and built that integration for organizations. And we'll talk a little bit about the types of customers that we're actually working with today, Fortune 500 financial services organizations. So although the cybersecurity regulation requires you to have multi-factor authentication in place, we know, and what our customers have come back and communicated with us, is there's plenty of shortcomings with just having a second factor of authentication. especially when you look at the types of attacks, types of phishing attacks, hacktivism attacks, targeted attacks that are taking place in the market on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. It's been well established. NIST no longer recommends organizations leverage a one-time passcode via SMS as a second factor of authentication. We have seen financial services firms, both in North America as well as over in Europe, actually have breaches take place, cybersecurity events happen because their SMS second factor was compromised. Tokens, hard tokens, have been actually compromised in the past, and most people are aware of this, but there's other factors with regards to hard tokens. Within the actual legislation, it's not just having to support your employees or your customers, but it's your contractors. Our customers, the banks that we work with are telling us that to potentially support tens to hundreds of thousands of contractors to actually deliver hard tokens out to them, not only is it costly, but it's not flexible. We also believe very strongly, and our customers are telling us at SecureAuth, that we should not prompt and have to be prompted with a second factor of authentication every time you traverse from application to application. Knowledge-based questions easily can be impacted by hacktivism, advanced persistent threats. Social engineering will actually cause issues, and that is a very common way that hackers can actually abstract out components. As a simple example, your pet's name, and be able to get that off of Facebook and use that as a way to gain access into an environment. And then when you look at something such as push to accept, which is great end user experience, but there's a challenge there. When you look at the proliferation of types of attacks that are actually taking place, these are advanced persistent threats that can happen, and when an end user just starts hitting accept to stop the attack, that allows and enables the bad actor to gain access into the environment. So how do we start to look at solving this challenge and going from just being in compliance and making sure that you're meeting compliance from a regulatory side of the house, but secondly, how do we actually develop a layered approach to not only create a frictionless end user experience, but increase the levels of security that allows you to detect activity, protect, and actually provide remediation capabilities. So the first thing that we have to think about here is this, within this layered approach, is we have to take it beyond just being in compliance. At SecureAuth, some of the things that we actually do and provide for our financial services organizations is we can actually, through our identity threat protection services, SecureAuth actually has the ability to identify the risks and identify risks up front, and whether those risks come from anonymous networks, reverse proxies, anonymous proxies, Tor-net browsers, we can actually identify proactively prior to the user attempting to authenticate. We've actually had situations where our customers have come back to us based on the policies, and you are required to have risk-based policies, be able to actually detect unauthorized access. And our customers are coming back to us telling us that they are proactively going to their business partners and notifying them until they do something about credentials that have been compromised. They're blocking them and not allowing them on and having access to their networks. Because today we actually live in a boundaryless infrastructure. You no longer have just your traditional four walls and access points. We've also seen plenty of our financial services customers believe just having users, whether it's employees or contractors, coming in over VPN, that they're secure. We've discovered through our identity protection services and been able to show our customers a level of anonymous activity, successful anonymous activity that's actually authenticated into their environment that they were never aware of. This becomes extremely valuable for an organization. As we provide these levels and layers of controls, we also have to take into consideration the end user experience. We will look at stuff like geo-velocity violations, geofencing violations. And I like to refer, and my customers have consistently told me, you know, if it's a known good actor and we know who you are, we know who your device is, we know your credentials, we know your behavior patterns, we can let you through. There's no reason to force a stepped up level of authentication. That's the enforcing risk-based policies that we look at from an adaptive capabilities. But when we actually can proactively identify the risks in advance. Some of our financial services customers actually have implemented SecureAuth in their portal environment. And by implementing in their portal environment, what they have discovered is the level of suspicious and malicious activity that was attempting to gain access to sensitive data in their environment was way beyond anything they imagined. And they averaged, on a monthly basis, thousands of suspicious activity. SecureAuth has actually been able to not only to help them, but we've actually been able to show that they have had malicious activity coming from known cyber criminals. This is in tremendous value, being able to protect the customer, but blocking the bad guys from ever getting access into their environment. What is also critical when we look at this layered approach is how do we take the high fidelity events, the anomalies in behavior and activity, and feed that information up into your SIM tool, into the Security Operations Center. SecureAuth has built native integration to all of the common SIM tools so that we can show proactively when there's been nefarious activity. We can actually show in the detection that an individual's credentials are no longer valid, and they need to take a proactive approach to this. So what SecureAuth is doing here from a layered approach is actually enforcing your policies as an access point. We're identifying the inadequate threats. We're actually protecting the integrity, and we're making sure if someone gains access to something, they are who they say they are, and we're also protecting the data so that no nefarious activity gains access to the data here. This becomes extremely valuable for any organization and how you can actually protect yourself against these cybersecurity events that are happening here. And you can proactively detect unauthorized access. As a result, you're able to, through our protection services of all these different layers here, be able to verify third-party credentials and make sure that they are valid. We've also been working very closely with customers who, for instance, are experiencing advanced persistent threats, botnet type attacks, because their executives' credentials were compromised. Maybe a board level credentials were compromised, even though they've never attempted to log into the applications, whether it's through the portal. This is critical, that SecureAuth can actually help you proactively, whether it's through Office 365 or your portal over VPN, be able to identify these threats and detect them and protect the organization. So some of the key takeaways that we've actually covered over the last 15 minutes or so in this quick webinar is we actually can provide guidelines that, as a financial services firm, on how to actually be in compliance with the regulatory laws that the New York State has implemented and help you in doing business in the state of New York. You do need to have your entities covered and in compliance by September 1st. But remember also that being in compliance does not mean security. So not only can SecureAuth help you with being in compliance, we can actually help you become secure around your credentials. You will actually have to prepare an annual certificate of compliance to the state. The first time you will have to actually do that is in February of 2018. And it's not determined what the actual fines will be if you're out of compliance yet, but that will be coming shortly by the state. Multi-factor authentication is a key component of this legislation, and enforcing risk-based policies. Those risk-based policies is what SecureAuth provides from an adaptive capabilities to proactively tie the identity and detect the identity over to the actual authentication process in a proactive, real-time capabilities. We established also that obviously a second factor is not enough, and that you have to even go beyond multi-factor authentication to help with being secure. Between SecureAuth, our Connected Security Alliance with integration with other vendors, as well as our system integrator partners, we can not only help you meet that compliance, but we can actually help you exceed it and create a stronger security framework to be successful within your company. Now, I'd like to pause and stop and kind of go over some of the questions that are coming in through the panel here. And it looks like there's a couple here for Danny. So, Danny, the first question that actually came in is, do you see the state of New York expanding these requirements in the future years?
Absolutely. I think New York is just one of the first states to tag along to some of the requirements that we're seeing globally. There's a new initiative within Europe, GDPR, that identifies regulatory requirements for protecting personal data. There's another new initiative within the European Union as well that addresses financial institutions, specifically it's PSD2. That is a regulation where payment service providers have to be prepared to comply with different types of multi-factor authentication, security requirements of various sorts to protect the identity and the payment card and payment cards as well. So I definitely think New York is just one of the first states, if not at a state level, but maybe more at a national level. I've also seen some additional proposals coming in from NIST as well.
Excellent. Here's another actually great question. I'll let Danny handle this one, which is what industries, well, beyond financial services are next within the state of New York?
Great question. I see retail being kind of next on the list. Any consumer data or areas, organizations with consumer portals are definitely targets of this. Consumers want their information protected, and organizations that work with third parties really need to start thinking about how the third party protects and can help them build and develop their security posture. I also think that organizations that have access to healthcare data are going to be the next targets as well. I think the health medical industry, the health industry is going to be a little bit different. Oftentimes their requirements are driven by a much broader legislation that gets pushed across the entire vertical as opposed to being managed at a state and local level. I know Maryland is not far behind pushing their own e-scripts through, e-scripts requirements through, but that, again, was being mandated and dictated at a federal level.
And another question actually for you, Danny. I'll let you take these. What have been some of the biggest challenges that customers have actually faced when trying to enable these requirements?
I think the largest challenge, it varies from organization to organization. I've definitely seen some organizations that have come to us and have asked for help in just getting multi-factor launched. They have no SSO solution, they've never implemented MFA, and then I've seen really robust, very mature organizations still struggle with how they can advance and enhance their already implemented multi-factor authentication, either with our solution at an adaptive layer, including a protection and detection piece to that as well, so that they can stay ahead of these regulations and that they can lead their peers in the industry with providing to their customers and their consumers a greater sense of security and assurance that they've put the latest protections in place. So I've actually seen Some organizations struggle at just a rudimentary policy implementation level all the way to advancing and providing a more robust security posture.
Okay, and then I think we have time for one more question. The last question kind of actually maps over to that. I'll give some first comments, and then Danny, if you feel like it makes sense to expand upon, which is how quickly can you actually implement multi-factor? Typically, our customers that we work with, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 customers as well, SMB type customers, it becomes a weeks type implementation. We've seen organizations of 30 to 50,000 employees that are able to turn on the adaptive controls, and actually turning on the adaptive controls for the workflows takes literally minutes to do that, and then we can actually just monitor before even enforcing any types of stepped-up authentication. So it's actually something that gets turned on in weeks, and very quick process, whether that is for a business employee environment or on a portal side. It might take slightly longer, but it's not a traditional 9 to 12 months implementation. We see our customers up and running, gaining value within 30 to 60 days. Okay, I don't see any other questions at the moment based on our time, and I want to be respectful of that for everyone that has attended. Next steps from this, you can actually contact SecureAuth. We have a readiness assessment. There's a number here as well as email alias that you can reach out to. To learn more about SecureAuth and how we're actually helping companies protect and prevent the misuse of stolen credentials, you can visit us at www.secureauth.com. I'd like to thank everyone that attended the webinar today. Look forward to speaking with everyone. Thank you, and a special thanks to Danny for spending some time with us.